good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the NBA Returns. I think we're on 34 now, which is crazy to think about. It feels like just the other day we were getting started in the bubble. But once again, we have some things ramping up in the wild world of basketball. No Raj tonight. He is off load management. So it's just gonna be me and Henry running things. Not a ton of wide variety of topics to talk about, but the big one obviously is that the NBA and the Players Union essentially agreed on a start for it's going to be barely the 2020-2021 season. We almost got a full 2021 year without any awkward hyphens. But looks like they're going to be starting. I kind of have the list of dates here. Real quickly, we'll kind of touch on all of them, and Henry, obviously, I'll get your thoughts. But this is what we have here. We have the NBA draft obviously coming up on the 18th, so that's going to be next Thursday. Obviously, we're doing a live show. I'll get the link for that by the end here and post that. Definitely want everybody to tune in there. Shortly after that, 2 days after that, on the 20th, free agency begins, I think, at 6 o'clock Eastern time on the 20th, so that's Saturday. And then the 22nd of November is when players can actually start signing deals. I'm sure we'll hear of many agreements, from the beginning, but they can actually start signing on the 22nd. December 1st, training camp begins. So just a week and a half later, everybody gets back to work. I think the record is, I think it's going to be 278 days for teams that didn't make the bubble since the last time that they actually played. So good for those guys to get back in. Whereas our Celtics and Lakers are going to be not even 100 days of rest back at it. And then December 22nd is the targeted opening night, followed swiftly by the annual Christmas Day games. We don't know any schedules or matchups yet. I'm sure they're still working through the details. But Henry, what are your thoughts on kind of the overview about opening night being the 22nd? I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that? And just about this it seems like it's spread out, but it's also not. It's a very free flowing and quick schedule. A lot of things are going to happen very quickly, and I feel like our heads are going to be constantly spinning with all the new, signings, drafts, trades, and just any announcements. I think it's going to be just a whirlwind of a couple of weeks here. What are your thoughts on kind of how the NBA scheduled this?
I mean, it makes sense for the rest of the league that didn't play since March. I mean, Steph Curry, he's ready to run, but players like the Lakers are their Christmas Day team. They're usually included in the Christmas Day schedule. So starting December 22nd, that's when the season starts. Now, can we see the Lakers and the Celtics and all those big names playing already in Christmas Day? I can see that happening because, the league obviously wants to push for that. They're not going to go Christmas Day without those type of teams. So is it going to be early for the teams that were in the finals in the Western Conference, in the conference finals? Yeah, it's going to be really early. But LeBron joked around. He said that he's going to be cherry picking, at the beginning of the season. But and you know what? I don't blame him. They won 6 games against the Miami Heat. It's weird we're talking about it right now that this show, or we started this show, the NBA returns, and now the NBA is returning again right before we know it. So before we know it, also the season is going to start. Do I agree with it? Yes, for teams that haven't played since March, because those teams, like I said, they're ready to go. But for teams that were in the bubble, at least for the last, a few rounds, I feel bad for them because, they were isolated from their families. They were isolated from their cities. They were literally isolated from everybody and everything except for their teammates and staff. So for them to kind of go back already to work after such, and we're still in unprecedented times. So it's a mental toll that I'm kind of worried in terms of is it going to affect their performance?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to affect LeBron's performance? Because if they play on Christmas Day, which I'm pretty sure they are, do you expect them? Yeah, do you expect the Lakers to play, let's say, in playoff form, or the same Lakers that Well, what do you expect from them?
Well, yeah, I mean, first off, I think it's important to acknowledge that the two biggest reasons the NBA did this, for one, you're exactly right, for the teams that haven't played since March, and I get that. It's like I said, the number I think was 278 days, or about that for most teams since I think we stopped back in March for the COVID break there. So it's partially about getting those guys back together, and it's also, let's be honest, it's a money motivated move on both sides, right? The players want to not lose as much as they're already going to lose some of their salary, but they don't want to lose any more than they already have to. And the league itself is trying to make money back because, as fun as the bubble was, and I thought it was perfectly executed in so many different ways, they really didn't have any fans. They didn't have as many people watching. It was such a weird time of, obviously, there was, the most unique playoffs we ever had. They lost a lot of money, and they're down, 500 million to $1 billion that they're trying to recoup right now. And that's essentially the difference between starting December 22nd and what I've always advocated for, which is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, which is the 18th of January. So that's the difference right there. That's the reasons why they're doing it. They're financially motivated for sure, and I get it. But it does stink. It stinks for teams like your Celtics, my Lakers, the Heat, and really like the Final Four. So Lakers, Heat, Nuggets, and Celtics. I think it's tough for those teams to come out. And to your question, I think that the level of play is probably not going to be there right away. Maybe the Celtics, they're a little bit younger. They're fresh. I think they're going to be fine. Same thing with Denver. They're a pretty young team. But, as far as like the Lakers go, LeBron is known to kind of orchestrate the regular season to his liking. That way he picks his spots for getting some rest. We know Anthony Davis usually has some nagging injuries that he likes to rest as well. So I think combined with those two guys already, plus this accelerated schedule, I do think you're going to see LeBron miss some games and AD as well. I think they're going to, I don't think there's no cut and dry way about it. They're going to be load management games. I think when the Lakers do play, it's going to take them a while to get their rhythm. And I think it stinks because I think the West is going to be, just like it is every year, super competitive, and you don't have a lot of wiggle room to slack off and lose games. So I think it's going to be a very fine line that Vogel and the coaching staff and the training staff and the players are going to have to kind of navigate at the start of the year, because they're going to be in the spotlight right away. They're defending champs. They're going to be opening night guaranteed, and they're going to be Christmas Day guaranteed. But that's why I mean, you asked me if I'd rather trade them not playing for since March. No, I'd rather, have them be going out as the defending champs, but it is what it is. I think the important thing to consider too is, and I've thought about it as I've complained about this start, is that it'll be good to just have it back again. It'll be good to have like guys that we haven't seen since March, right? We're talking, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson. We're finally going to have Kevin Durant back. We're going to have Kyrie Irving playing with him in Brooklyn. We're going to have even just like other fun guys like Bradley Beal, Trae Young, like guys we just John Wall's going to be back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like so the Wizards will win 32 games instead of 18. So, but like there's all these guys that haven't played that are really. We saw a high level of basketball in the bubble, and I think that was great. And now we're going to get to see so many guys back and get to play the game that they're obviously so good at. What matchups would you kind of want to see either for opening night and then for Christmas? Because I know this was being floated around. Let's say opening night is generally 2 games. So you get an 8 o'clock and a 10:30. So what would you want for opening night?
Oh, the Warriors. The Warriors versus the Lakers for sure. Because Stephen A. Smith keeps talking about the Warriors are the biggest threat in the West for the Lakers. Mm-hmm. So, but here's the thing. We're talking about a team that hasn't played since March. But so there's 2 sides to this. There's pros and cons of that. Mm-hmm. Like not playing for that long. Yes, your body has a lot of rest. Steph Curry is over 30 years old. Klay Thompson's a veteran himself. So their body, they're going to benefit from that rest. But at the same time, there is such thing as rustiness. I mean, from personal experience, going on the basketball court after months of not playing, it takes a while for a few free throws to fall. But it's a full mental thing. So, like the Lakers in that aspect or that scenario, I feel like they have the upper hand because at the end of the day, like LeBron just bought a new Xbox, so right now he's just chilling. So he's resting his body. He's resting his body. But the thing is that I'm worried about is, are the Warriors going to be ready enough, because they didn't have that bubble experience. And I feel like the teams that are going to benefit the most from this upcoming season are going to be the teams that were in the bubble. That includes the Suns, even the Kings, because they were playing in a different environment that really challenged them mentally. The Warriors didn't have that. Who else? The Hawks didn't have that.
The Wizards, all those kind of bottom feeder East teams.
Exactly. Then, those type of teams didn't have that. So I can see a Lakers Warriors opening day or Christmas Day game. Mm-hmm. And I can see the Lakers coming out on top just because they have all this momentum going. And as much as LeBron is like joking around that he's cherry picking, here's the reality of it. Once it comes down to it, and once the season starts, he's not going to do that.
It's go time. Yeah. The lights are on. He's going to play in the big games for sure.
Exactly. So don't you think he's hearing, commentators and everybody saying that the biggest threat is the Warriors?
He reads everything.
Yeah, exactly. He does. If he ever, denies it, he does. He listens and he hears all this stuff. But so I honestly think as crazy it might sound, I think the Lakers have the biggest advantage out of every team going into the next season. Yes, there's wear and tear,
Mhm.
but how much is that wear and tear going to linger on, towards the beginning of the season? Because they are getting, okay, last game was mid-October, and
Mhm.
then we're starting in December, so that's 2 months. 2 months of break. I think 2 months of no basketball. Oh, but the factor of training camp and all that. We also
Yeah.
got to factor that in. So
Which they can, I mean, the coaches can adjust that. You can make training camp as light or as hard as you want it to be, which is nice. You have that ability to control the intensity level, the number of practices when you're going, the rest. So I think
mhm.
LeBron and Vogel and those guys will kind of work on that. But that's an interesting point too with them. I didn't really think about them being the team along with Miami who just played basketball most recently. That they're going to be in the biggest rhythm, at least chemistry wise, right? They're depending on who they bring back. I think that's another thing too. You look at some of these teams like the Warriors who have the second pick in the draft, and we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know, are they going to trade the pick? Are they going to take a James Wiseman or LaMelo or Edwards or whoever's at the top of that board, and then have to incorporate that person into their already ingrained system? Or are they going to they're going to kind of swing for the fences and try to make a trade with Wiggins and that pick to bring in another win now player who they still have to incorporate into their system? I mean, remember, that's not like the Warrior system is very free flowing and they make it look very easy, but like at the same time, it requires a lot of precision, a lot of ball movement, constant screens, constant cuts, and kind of working around Steph and Clay's strengths. So I think that whatever they do in the next couple of weeks, along with some other teams who have high draft picks or cap money to spend, even the Clippers. The Clippers are looking to shake things up, try to add another guard, maybe Drew Holiday, maybe even we heard Russell Westbrook. There's going to be that adjustment period as well. So that could level the playing field for teams like the Lakers and the Heat and Celtics and Nuggets. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. What are your thoughts? I know they talked about the way they're going to schedule it. They're looking at about 72 games, so we're going to scale it back 9 from the usual 81 or 82, excuse me, 10 from the 82. And what do you think? They talked about doing like MLB style series where it's going to be like, for example, say Houston comes in, they're going to play like the Lakers 2 games in a row and then play at the Clippers, like have a day off and then play at the Clippers a game, or they're going to hit like areas in spurts and play teams in spurts to avoid the travel. Cause that's obviously the biggest thing, right?
Yeah.
They're not in the bubble anymore. They are going to be on planes. They're going to be in somewhat public areas at times. So we're going to kind of see what happens with the NFL in the NBA. We might have like, hey, on a Tuesday, hey, James Harden had a potential positive test. He's going to have to sit out. And I think that's going to be a little difficult for them to handle at first. But what are your thoughts on that type of schedule? Because, normally you get these big matchups, right? So you get, Lakers, Rockets, and whoever wins, doesn't matter, it'll be a good competitive game. And normally the two teams kind of, they battle it out and then they go to their corners and they see each other in, a couple weeks. Well, here, like you could have Lakers Rockets. Remember like 2 years ago when Rondo and Chris Paul got in the fight? Like imagine having that happen or having something very, very
Twice.
tense. And then you got to play like then you're playing each other the next night with like
Yeah.
the blood still boiling kind of thing. What are your thoughts on like how that scheduling is going to work in terms of quality of play, all those kind of extracurricular activity moments that I was kind of touching on? How do you think of that?
I kind of like it because this all falls under COVID protocols. So that's what they want to do. They want to minimize traveling. They want to minimize, players having to go, from city to city in order to, let's say there's a positive test to stop the spread. That's the whole point of, so many protocols. The NFL is failing in that miserably, honestly. Now the NBA is looking toward, like they're probably looking at the NFL like, what can we do better? Like having that MLB style type of schedule. I think that's the best way to go about it, especially since it's going to be nearly impossible to think of a bubble idea with 30 teams because that includes more teams, more personnel, more staff, more executives, going in one isolated area that can probably fit them. That's not really possible for them. So I think this is their best bet. I think it'll be interesting to see, uh, but I'm pretty sure, so they're gonna have like a regular season series, right? Just like the
Right.
MLB. Okay,
Right.
so it's gonna be interesting. Yes. Are there gonna be spans of games where people don't want to watch the Kings versus the Knicks 3 straight games? Yeah. Are there gonna be 3 straight games where people are gonna want to watch a Lakers Celtics matchup for 3 straight games? 3 straight
Right.
games. So it's gonna be interesting, and also I'm just thinking about how they're gonna go about it, and because they're planning to have fans. That's the thing, like,
Right.
or
Some
like,
capacity. Yep.
exactly, like at least yeah, exactly. So limited capacity, but I'm honestly worried about just positive COVID tests, really
Of course.
deterring the season because we see what's going on in college football. We see what's going on in the NFL now, outside of the bubble, and the bubble worked to perfection. Yeah, it's gonna be maybe we'll get a headline saying LeBron tested positive, and now they have no LeBron for three straight games against, let's say, the Warriors. So what is that going to do to the regular season
Right.
record, right? So it's going to be there's thankfully, Adam Silver's takes a lot of precaution with his players. The NBPA does an excellent job, keeping their players in check in terms of having their safety and their thoughts first,
Hmm.
before any major decisions. Obviously, they can't really alter the decision of the starting day of December 22nd. But aside from that, I think that's my biggest worry. Just positive COVID tests throughout the season. That and they're playing with old coaches, so
Yeah,
like
no, a lot of
yeah,
them are older than you think. They don't You
uh,
don't think about like NBA coaches being old like you think about, say, politicians, right? We hear about the age factor all the time in that regard. But when it comes to coaches, you're just like, oh, like that's Doc Rivers. Like Doc Rivers is like, I think in his 60s, like, but you wouldn't think it because you're not watching him for his age. You're watching him coaching on the sidelines and you're seeing him on camera. So you're absolutely right. And
yeah,
I agree, that's as much as well as the bubble was executed, and I think we touched on it so many times. It was perfect. They did a great job, just like the NHL did, but and obviously other leagues too. It's going to be very difficult because now you have this travel element incorporated. You have just like the NFL and other leagues, you got the NBA's got guys that are going to be tempted to break whatever rules, whether it's you can't leave the hotel on the road or imagine going to Houston for a 3-game series if you're some team and you're not allowed to leave the hotel if that's the rule, or whatever the thing is, like, or Atlanta, which is like one of the best NBA cities according to the players, or Miami. Like, imagine being confined even though that under normal circumstances you'd be out and about. I feel like we're going to be due for some slip ups too from players. I don't know who, but we already saw it in the bubble with Daniel House Jr. and Lou Williams, who those rules were as strict and as concrete as could be, and they still decided to try and break them. So I'm going to be interested to see how that plays a role. And you're right, that's going to play a role. Like, say, even if, say, like somebody on the Lakers that's a 12th man breaks the rule or something, or is exposing himself to the potential virus, and then next thing you know, he maybe is not infected, but Anthony Davis is infected. Like, there could be a trickle down effect there, and now Anthony Davis is the one sitting out for 3 or 4 days, and that's going to be obviously affecting teams in a big way. So it's going to be tricky. I think we have the potential to see. It's going to be, I think, the most unique regular season that we've ever had, and I think that's something to say coming off of what was the most unique regular season we ever had, right? With the actual break itself, I think things are going to be very tricky. I think things are going to look weird and it's going to take some adjusting. But I think the NBA does as good of a job, better than any of the other major sports in terms of accommodating during this time period, during this, pandemic. So I think they'll be able to pull it off better than most, but there will be some slip ups, some bumps in the road. Trying to think what else we wanted to talk about.
well,
With
one thing
the
one thing I wanted to
Yeah.
bring up real quick is
Mhm.
just in the same topic, something that came into mind was that the NBA is not just dealing with the players, personnel, and everybody involved on the court. They're dealing with the players' families too. They're dealing with the families of the coaches.
Mhm.
I mean, let's remember why Avery Bradley decided to opt out, because his son has underlying conditions.
Right.
So if he were to opt out in a bubble that was worked to perfection, what do you think his thoughts are going to be in an NBA season where potentially and most likely there's going to be positive tests that he may be exposed to? So players like that, that really it's concerning. It's concerning. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, you had guys like Trevor Ariza, Avery Bradley, who opted out with concerns for their kids, and it's going to be tough. They're going to have to, just like with the other sports, they're going to have the mandated testing every day, and I think they're going to have to be. You can't be like super 100% strict. We're like, hey, don't leave your homes unless you're coming to the arena, because like these guys are still trying to somewhat adjust to the lives that they're used to living. But at the same time, you just have to be smart with it. I think teams just have to be very diligent with their testing. Um, Report it right away if there is any kind of positive, and shut down the facilities if that's the case. You see that with the NFL, while they're having probably more tests positive than they would like. When somebody does test positive, whether it's a staff member or a coach or a player, they shut down the facility right away and they try to nip it in the butt. So that's what you got to do. You got to nip it in the butt right away, shut things down, limit any kind of exposure. And that's going to be the best way. It's not foolproof. It's not perfect by any means, but that's all they have at this point until we have until they have a vaccine and it's proven and tested and it's going to work for everybody. That's how this is going to be in all sports. So that's a good point, and it's going to be interesting to see what teams get affected by that. There's a lot of question marks. We're talking about a broad outline, I think, of the schedule in terms of the dates that I mentioned and the scheduling and stuff like that. But it's just an outline. I mean, we don't know what's going to get filled in, and so on and so forth. Moving as we get into the season. So it'll just be interesting. The one thing that they did touch on too at the end of the season was potentially there's talks of kind of how they did the play-in in the bubble, right? Where you had the 9 seed versus the 8 seed if they were within so many games. So we had that Portland-Memphis matchup to decide who was going to be, in the playoffs. They're potentially looking at doing that for like seeds 7, 8, 9, and 10. And it's like a play in there where like the 9 and 10 seeds would have to win without losing twice. And then they, the winners of each, play each other to get into as the 7 and 8 seeds. What are your thoughts on adding that extra spot? Like, how is that going to benefit teams maybe in the West where things are a little bit tighter, right? Where we have a lot closer, every year we have a 9 and a 10 seed. It's like, man, they were only 2 games away from the playoffs. And then how's it going to benefit teams conversely in the East where sometimes there is a sizable margin? Do you think it's going to give some of those lower seeds a little bit, I guess, more momentum moving in, or like, what would you think? Like, how would that look to you?
It's just all these new decisions and all these new adjustments. They have pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
Pros is that teams such as the Kings or teams like that in the West where they're always like at the 9th, 10th seed, or they're always scratching the surface, trying to get into playoffs. That'll work to their advantage because now they're going to have the opportunity at the end of the season where they fall short again. But having that opportunity to make the playoffs in these playoff game or these playing tournaments or playing games and everything. But then the con, like you said, sizable difference in the East. So when when the 8th seed and the 9th seed is separated by a differential of 10 games, and the 9th seed ends up beating the 8th seed in the playing games, and they sneak into the playoffs. Is it fair for the 8th seed? Because we've had a structure throughout the entire NBA that hasn't been changed until now because of our circumstances, but it's just those pros and cons. Every decision being made moving forward has pros and cons. The playing tournaments, it worked fine in the bubble. The everybody knowingly, I think, thought that the Blazers were the most deserving team to make the 8th seed. That could just be me talking, but it just goes to show, like, wow, that playing tournament, worked in pretty well because now the Blazers have a chance, and everybody was talking about if the Blazers make it, they're the Lakers' biggest threat, blah blah blah, and that wasn't the case. I understand, but
Remember those days?
for real. And everybody was saying like, okay, well, that's another topic, but that's the thing. So it's the pros and cons in that, like, if you see, let's say the Hornets that predominantly are a 9th, 10th seed, but they're behind, 8 to 12 games behind the 8th
Right.
seed. They win whatever 8th seed that is. How is that going to work moving forward? Is that going to be fair? Because I don't think it's going to be fair for, that 8th seed making it to the 8th seed until, the very last game of the season. And, we secured our spot, but we still have to play a playing game.
Mm-hmm.
Anything can happen in the NBA. There are going to be a lot of upsets. They're going to be an upset from the ninth seed winning the 10th or the 8th seed. And how does that work well for franchises that, live off of being 8th seeds? There's quite a few, that like interchange and stuff. So
Right.
it's going to be interesting. Like I said, there's just so many pros and cons for every single decision made by Adam Silver and his commission and everything. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I feel like this season may be just up in the air as last season in like many regards. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the playing games and the implications just moving forward from this?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea of it. I enjoyed watching, the playing game between Memphis and Portland. It was very fun, and we came within a couple of possessions of it going to a second game there. If Memphis could have gotten a couple stops, but I agree with you. There's pros and cons. One of the reasons they would also do it too is again money. They could generate more money, play in the neutral site, and just it kind of increase their bankroll a little bit there around the league. Which is again, you got to think about. At the end of the day, it's still a business, and that's what a lot of these moves are going to be motivated off of. They're off of this business plan to try and regain money because they did lose a severe chunk of it, like a lot of other sports did. But from a basketball side, I think it's cool in the West. I think that the problem is the power balance, right? I think it's very cool in the West. If you just come flat out and say like, hey, the 7 and 8 seeds are not guaranteed anymore. You got to do this playing game. It doesn't matter if you have the 7, 8 seed locked up going into the final week. We're going to do this tournament. I'm okay with that. Like as long as you have a clear like guideline, and at that point, it's like okay, the top 6 seeds in each conference are guaranteed, and that's how it's going to be. It's just like anything else in the league, right? Everything changes, whether it's adding in a shot clock, adding in a 3-point line, adding in all these other rules and different guidelines. We've changed the playoffs, from best of 3 to best of 5 to best of 7. Like things to me change at a flowing rate in the NBA over the course of history. And that's okay. If you want to define that, just define it, make it very clear. Yeah. And then teams will, maybe the first 1 or 2 years, whoever got the 7 seed might whine about it, but if they get bounced or something like that. But over time, will grow to just be kind of like anything else. We'll just adapt. But the con of it is the power struggle right now and the power difference between the West and the East, because like we talked about, you look at I pulled up the standings while you were making your point there, and you had Dallas as the 7 seed last year, Portland as the 8, Memphis as the 9, and Phoenix as the 10. Now that would be a wildly entertaining playing series. I think all those teams would have been very fun to watch, and we could get. I think there's no doubt in the West this year you will have the same exact thing. Plus, it makes that race for the 10 seed fun, which keeps the other teams invested in it. And would hopefully kind of deter from tanking, right? That's, I think, another reason why they want to do it, to deter from like, hey, we got a couple guys hurt or we're not playing well. We're just going to punt on, whoever's going to be the top pick in the draft next year. But when you look at it over in the East, the West, all those teams were within a couple games of each other. In the East, you had the Magic as the 8 seed. And then Charlotte, as you mentioned, was there as the 9 seed, 6 games away. It's like, do we deserve to have one? And that's going to be the conversation that comes up every year. Is one of the conferences is not going to be deserving of having the playing games, and they're still going to have to do it. And somebody may get screwed, even though they have a 5 or 6 game lead. So that is a con to it that's going to come up. It's going to be something that the NBA is either just going to have to come out and say, hey, this is how it is. We got to accept it. Or they'll have to maybe adjust after after 1 or 2 or 3 years of it. But it is interesting. I mean, I think it's cool to see like where the league has come, how far they've come from in terms of how the playoffs work. So I said, if I had to lean one way, I'd probably lean towards being in agreement for it, because I think we could get some really cool games. And imagine like, the Mavericks playing Phoenix, in a duel for, the 7 or 8 seed or something like that, and just having kind of that bubble-like play, but, outside of it. So it's interesting. We'll see. There's going to be more updates. I don't think it's set in stone yet. It's not concrete. It hasn't been like fully announced. It's just been highly rumored by a lot of, reputable sources like Shams and Woj and those guys. So we'll obviously stay updated as that goes. Just a couple of things to wrap up. The two really, I don't want to get too into like, we'll cover free agency and trades and stuff as we get closer, but the 2 big names that I think are unavoidable right now, Drew Holiday of New Orleans has been openly made available. So some teams are going to be looking at him. Teams like Denver, teams like Miami, Brooklyn, the Clippers, those are kind of the big guns that are out there who might be trying to finagle and take a swing and offer New Orleans a package. Let's start with that. We'll get to the other guy that we kind of already mentioned in Westbrook, but for Drew Holiday, I think those are the big 4. The Nets, the Heat, the Nuggets, and the Clippers have all been linked to him in some way, shape, or form. Who do you think would be able to generate the best offer? And if you can think of like the players on the spot, go for it. If not, just give me the team. And where do you think his best fit would be in terms of like helping a team win a title?
Oh, it would be the Clippers. Like the Clippers would have the best trade package to get Drew Holiday, a player like Drew Holiday, who's a borderline all-star, but is that third guy that the Clippers need in order to, hopefully get over the hump. Because let's say Lou Will's getting up there in age. Montrezl Harrell, he's great. Just won 6th Man of the Year, yes, but can be included in a trade package. I'm not saying, Landry Shamet, that would be good in a trade package. Like the Clippers have the assets. The Nets have the assets too, get rid of Spencer Dinwiddie, maybe Karis LeVert,
Jared Allen.
Jared Allen, but then that kind of takes away their original core, you know.
Hmm.
So it'd be kind of tricky. Plus, Drew Holiday would predominantly be playing the shooting guard because they got Kyrie in there, and now they have Kevin Durant. So he'd be a perimeter. He'd be in the perimeter, but they will be losing those guys. They would just have Temple left, and then Joe Harris, who those guys wouldn't necessarily be made for a valuable trade package. But yeah, if you include Levert or Dinwiddie and Jared Allen, then I think that will be huge for the Pelicans. Actually, if you think about it. I just made that trade package up right now in my head, but that's something that's something that the Nets can really offer. Now think about a team with Lonzo, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Zion Williamson, and Brandon Ingram,
It's
especially
not bad.
with which is not bad. I'm not saying like fifth seed good, but I'm
It's
probably
it's
like
decent depth, right? I mean,
yeah,
you have some interchangeable bodies there. They already have young guys and Jackson Hayes, who you'd hope to
mhm,
develop under Allen, Nikhil Alexander Walker. So that could be some pieces there. What about? I think that the tough part too is Miami. To me, it seemed like the one like man, they seem like they could have been one piece away last year from like real, besides the health issues, but one piece away from making that like a really interesting finals. But their dilemma is, do they sacrifice like their cap space next year to go for
no,
Drew Holiday?
no,
Because
no, no, no.
we know they're hunting for Giannis, right? And the Giannis to Heat rumors are only going to heat up kind of as we get going. So, but I think it'd be interesting. I don't think they'll do it. I think they're just being linked to him because they need another body. But it would be interesting to see like Drew and Jimmy. Like that's a destructive defensive backcourt. You have
Yeah,
Bam, you have
what
Hero.
do you think they would give up?
Well, that's the thing is they said they were not going to give up Hero for Holiday,
Oh
and that
no,
was
no,
kind of
no, no,
the
no.
stalemate. I like Hero. Hero's very good, but
He's
like
great. Yes, I
he
agree.
is, he is. It'd be interesting to see like
It'll be the
it'd have to be
stupidest move.
Hero,
Ugh,
none, maybe a salary cap filler and a Linux and like a draft pick or something like that.
Iguodala.
Maybe I don't know what the Heat's commitment. I don't know if him and Pat Riley had like a handshake agreement that if he like traded for him, he wasn't going to let him go. Iggy wants to be playing deep into the playoffs,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's guaranteed that with Miami as opposed to maybe New Orleans. Denver's the other team too. With they seem like they were definitely a piece away. It could be something around Gary Harris. I don't think Porter Jr. Porter Jr. is a very tough trade piece for them because he's got the injury issues. He's got the defensive issues as we saw, but he's young. We criticize him for his defense, but like everybody
He's gonna be great.
can't
He
play,
gets
yeah,
too
everybody
much.
can't play defense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Mhm.
he does shoot the ball very well. He shoots it with a lot of confidence. He had I didn't see that he had a lot of fear against the Lakers. He was very, very confident, almost cocky at times against them. So he's kind of a trade piece that's going to be interesting. But I agree. I think then Brooklyn could be looking at him. The Clippers could definitely use him as a. I mean that's a scary lineup because Drew Holiday I think is just as good of a defender as Pat Beverly. Can handle the ball, can shoot better, can make plays, can go to the rim. He does so many things better. So to have him, Paul George, and Kawhi, I think that's an extremely destructive defensive lineup for those top three. It would be nightmares to try to bring the ball up against those guys.
True, but if we have the same scenario as last year where Paul George underperforms.
All
No,
game.
yeah, in all honesty, then it will be the worst trade to give up so many assets.
Mm-hmm.
You they will probably give up, Lou Will, Harrell, Zubac probably. They'll
Something like
probably keep
that.
Zubac. Yeah, they'll probably keep Zubac, but that's the thing. It doesn't necessarily fall under like. I don't think we can ever rely on this looks great on paper. I think we have to only rely on we gotta wait
Yeah,
because I
it's
always
tough.
think yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And like I said, we have historical evidence with the 2013 Lakers. I'll always bring that up as the main example of this looks great on
You love to
paper.
just drive that dagger deeper and deeper and
Hey, you guys won the championship. I got to do that. But
deeper.
like in all honesty, like
It looks
that
great
time
on paper.
looked great on paper,
I
right?
remember people were like, "Get the parade ready!" Like Lakers heat in the finals, and the
Mhm.
Lakers have the size, and it's going to be this, and this. And it was like, well, and then after what happened, Nash, things happened according to basically how they should have happened, right? Nash was
Yep.
old, got hurt. Dwight was coming off shoulder surgery, and wasn't the second fiddle guy that everyone thought he was going to be. Pau Gasol was older. Kobe had to carry that team all year and eventually towards Achilles, and that's going to kind of sidetrack them for a couple of years. But I think that's a good point. Everything looks great on paper. We love to sit here and be like, oh, if they only make this trade, and like I say, like, oh, the Heat would be great to get your Holiday, but like he's not the best catch and shoot 3-point shooter. I think he only shoots like 35% off catch and shoot threes. Combine that with Jimmy and Bam on the floor, and all of a sudden you don't really have a lot of spacing. So it could create problems going there. Like, there's a lot of things that you don't think about. You just see the name with the team, and we get excited. So that's a good point. I think we do have to wait and see. But I think he does get moved. I think he's almost owed it, right? I mean, he did his time in Philly, got him to the playoffs. Then they started the tank. They got rid of him. And then he went to New Orleans, had some success with Anthony Davis, but now is kind of left with all these young guys to mentor last year. I think he deserves like a real shot. So I hope he does go somewhere, whether it's Brooklyn or Denver or the Clippers, where he does get to compete deep into the playoffs. Because I'm a big Jrue Holiday guy. He plays hard.
I love him.
He's got no ego. He's an absolutely phenomenal two-way player. One of the best two-way players in this league that we have that never gets talked about. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. I think come draft night is when you might see something. I think like the dark horse team too, secretly, that I've heard is like the Warriors, which sounds weird again on paper because they have Steph and Clay, and you're not trading one of those guys for Jrue Holiday. But like, could they run out a 3-guard lineup? Could you just move Clay down to the 3, and then you have Jrue Holiday? Now you have Jrue and Clay all of a sudden kind of picking up the slack for Curry on defense and guarding the best guards and stuff like that. And you can kind of hide Curry on whoever the weakest perimeter player is. And that's an interesting concept too. I don't know if New Orleans would want the number 2 pick and other pieces, but there's going to be I think a lot of rumors heating up on Holiday as we get towards the draft and just beyond it. The other guy that I wanted to talk about that I briefly mentioned his name earlier that I just saw a lot about today was our boy Russell Westbrook. The two names that are popping up, the Knicks and the Clippers. I don't know the validity of the Clippers, and also I don't know how they'd make that work with their salaries because Kawhi and Paul George are making a ton of money, and Westbrook's making a ton of money, almost $40 million. Let's talk about the Knicks first, because that's clearly, I think, a move by the Knicks to get a star, which like I think Westbrook, you still say he's like a tier like 3 star.
Yeah.
And he will sell tickets and he gets to shine. But like, I don't think that brings them any, like, they might be a couple games closer to the playoffs, but I don't even know who they trade. They have a bunch of power forwards.
Julius Randle.
You have, if you're Houston, you're looking for, a big that could be mobile. So maybe Julius Randle, although his defensive numbers are atrocious. Mitchell Robinson is like their shining knight over there. He's this, raw but very talented center, is a great shot blocker, is still learning on defense and offense, but has a lot of skills. But would New York be willing to part with him for Westbrook in his contract? I don't know. What does Westbrook on the Knicks look like?
I mean, it'll be like Chris Paul and the Thunder. Can win games, can make it to the playoffs, but not past the first round by any means. Like, it'll be a waste in terms of what assets the Knicks are going to give up in order to get Westbrook. Because here's the thing, Westbrook, he's an established veteran now, and when I say that, I mean he's gonna get old, or he's getting old. He already lost a step in athleticism. His numbers, in right before the pandemic happened, his numbers were a little crazy in terms of he was averaging 30 a game.
He was hot.
He was hot. So can he translate that in a team driven solely kind of by himself? Is it going to be like a 2017 Russell Westbrook? I doubt it. I don't think he's going to be averaging a triple-double, especially carrying such young guys like RJ Barrett, Kevin Knox, and all those guys. I mean, it'll be a waste of a year for Westbrook. I'm going to say that, because the Knicks as a franchise as a whole, they have a lot of things to fix, especially with their front office and just their decision making. Especially their decision making in general. Plus the Knicks, it's kind of crazy how there's such a huge market team with such little success when the past 20 years. It's kind of So for Westbrook to in the latter half of his career, where he's getting up there in age, his athleticism is going to decline. Does he want to go with the Knicks? Does he want to be traded to? No. Hell no. If I were Westbrook, I would wave that off. That, and then also with the Clippers, I like what you mentioned in terms of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are making a lot of money They were
Mhm.
making and Russell Westbrook is making a substantial amount of
Westbrook might
money.
be. I think Westbrook is making more than both of them. Like individually,
Yeah,
he's
he
making more than Kawhi and Paul George.
was he making 40?
I think he's right around 40. Yeah.
40. Okay. Um, that's is gonna be weird for in terms of just salary cap and all this stuff, for the Clippers. But then also like it's just imagine a Paul George and Russell Westbrook dynamic. Wait, we've seen that already.
Right.
Yeah, we've seen that already. And here's the thing: Westbrook underperforms in the playoffs. Paul
Hmm.
George underperforms in the playoffs to get knocked out by a rookie Donovan Mitchell in 2018. Now they're even getting older. What's gonna happen when Luca takes over? Which is gonna happen.
Hmm.
It's
I agree.
inevitable. It's inevitable for them. And Kawhi is gonna be Kawhi. I still think that his performance in Game 7 against the Nuggets does not deteriorate his
Overall season
yeah,
and
his
play.
overall season and just his overall who Kawhi Leonard is because he carried the Raptors to a championship. He won Finals MVP with the Spurs. He's done his due diligence enough to
Mhm.
prove what he's got to prove. Paul George has a lot to prove. Russell Westbrook has a lot to prove. Having an MVP in your resume is great. Not everybody can say they're an NBA MVP, but not everybody can say they're an NBA champion too. And I think that's the main goal that both Paul George and Russell Westbrook want to get to. Now, that's the factor. Looks great on paper. Wow, if I'm playing 2K and I have
Right.
Russell
It's a
Westbrook
great
and
thing,
Paul George, yeah, it will be amazing, right? But then, like in real life, again, like when it comes to I think I was shocked too when I saw Paul George underperform the way he did because it wasn't just necessarily an underperformance. It worried me because I'm like, okay, are we ever going to get the Pacers Paul George that we saw back in the day?
in the
One
playoffs.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, one that can actually dominate games, go for 35 plus against some of the best players in the league. I'm not sure after what I saw last time. Russell Westbrook, we saw what happened. He had a hot game 1 against the Lakers, screamed at the babies. What happened?
Hmm.
Exactly. This is just it
Got blocked by LeBron every game the rest of the
exactly.
series.
It did not end well for him, especially because Mike D'Antoni's system is not for him. I think the small ball got its expiration date, especially with the Lakers. They just exposed them. It was kind of sad. But that's the thing. Unless the Rockets can get a big man to really complement Harden and Westbrook, then I think Westbrook's out of there, and I don't want to say his career's done because anything can happen.
Mhm.
But
It's tough.
it's tough. It's tough. It's really tough. So if I were Westbrook, I would be looking at many options. I would be looking to stay. I would be looking not to get traded. I don't think give it another go with James Harden because here's the thing: James Harden is still a top 5 player in the league. So to be
You're
a
still
long
you know what you're getting. Like at least
yeah
there's a comfortability, and with the Knicks, it could be a lot of question marks. With the Clippers, it could be boom or bust. Whereas like the Rockets are like the safe choice, I guess if that makes sense, to stay there.
yeah
Um,
yeah
so I will say I'll solve the Knicks problem for you. I'll tell you that as I tell everybody because it's very simple. It starts with James Dolan and it ends with James Dolan. The day that he gets out of there, they'll be in the playoffs and contending within 2 years. I promise you. Mark it down. I make these predictions. I'm telling you, he
hey,
sells the
sign
team.
it, sign
He
it.
sells the team within 2 years. They free agents will flock there again. They will draft better. They will just be overall better. He is the reason that Durant and Kyrie aren't in with the Knicks right now. There's no universe where Durant and Kyrie should have gone to the Nets. They should have gone to the Knicks, playing in the Garden, in
Yeah,
the Mecca,
uh-huh.
rewriting history for the Knicks. But one of the biggest reasons they didn't was because James Dolan was there, and Dolan's terrible. He's throwing out former players, banning them from the Garden. He's just a mess. So I'm not even going to waste more time with it because that's the same issue every year, and Knicks fans wonder why nothing's changing.
Do you fully blame him?
Like 85% because it trickles
Okay.
down because then he hires the wrong GMs who then
Mhm.
hire the wrong coaches who
Coach,
play the wrong system and they sign the wrong free agent. So it's not like 100%, but it's pretty close.
yeah.
As for Westbrook and the Clippers, I think it's like I said, 2K. It's a fun lineup. I don't think there's enough ball to go around because Kawhi's great and I love Kawhi. He's one of the best players in this league. He does need the ball a lot to work with it. He's becoming a much better creator, so he's only going to have the ball more in his hands. And he's the best player on the court most nights, so he should have the ball in his hands. Paul George is a guy who likes to do things in the ISO and kind of handle the ball on his own and take up a big chunk of it. And that's what you saw in the playoffs last year. It became very stagnant. It was Kawhi going 1-on-1, Paul George going 1-on-1, Lou Williams going 1-on-1. That's all you saw. So now you're essentially you're say Lou and Beverly are out there. and you replace that with Westbrook, who is notorious for needing the ball in his hands for most of the shot clock. I just don't see where that works at all. And I think it'd be, I mean, as funny as it would be to see the Clippers just implode again,
again.
um, you got to think that this team deserves a run to at least the conference finals. I don't think they get there with that trio. I just don't think it works. So I agree. Houston would probably be his best spot to just stay, him and Harden. Find a big man that can play defense and space the floor, and find some better wings and try to go at it. It's going to be a tricky offseason. But those are just two of the names that I just wanted to bring up quickly. We can kind of wrap up here with we kind of had the unexpected news today. 2020 has just been, I feel like it's just been, and I don't think we've seen more celebrity and big name people passing away. I mean, we just had Alex Trebek. He's not obviously related to the NBA, but he just passed away the other
Oh
day,
yeah, yeah.
which was extremely sad. And then Tommy Heintzen, who is, for those of you who are younger than us, don't probably, or are not as big NBA fans, probably don't know the name, but he passed away. Heintzen was a, 9-year veteran in the NBA. He has 8 rings as a player, played with a lot of those Bill Russell and Havlicek teams, when they had their dynasty there in the 50s and 60s, moved on to be their coach, won 2 more rings there, and then has essentially been a part of the Celtics. As I mentioned to you before we went on, he's been a part of every Celtics championship as either a player, a coach, or when he took over as they're doing their play-by-play. He's been doing that for 35, 40 plus years. I just think a very unique career. You can't say that many guys are quote unquote an NBA lifer, but I think that's what he was, right? I mean, the guy lives and breathes basketball, playing it from the time he was 22, 23 up until, I mean, he was calling games up until last year. So I think, you're a Celtics fan, obviously, so you could probably talk more than I will about it. But I just think, it is very sad, and it stinks that we're losing so many people, but definitely want to shed some light, because he definitely had a very, very good career. I mean, he made it to the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach, which not many people can say. So I'll leave it to you if you want to wrap up with some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, being a huge Celtic fan, I think we discuss it on this, especially because of all the events this year. I think we see that a lot of things are always bigger than sports, Like, I did grow up a diehard Celtic fan, especially in the LA area. So, hearing his play by play when, I would see the Celtics in the regular season, it was comforting for me, because he was the voice I always heard, And
Mm-hmm.
then it really brings me back to middle school. It brings me back to high school. It brings me back to those days and those games. I remember we lost against the Knicks in the playoffs. I think it was like 2013, 2012. And I started tearing up, and I was just hearing his voice and, just talking about how resilient our team is and just Celtic pride and all that stuff. And that's why I'm so connected with the team, because of that Celtic pride. And he was the epitome of that. When people talk about Celtic pride, they go back to the 50s, they go back to the 60s, because this franchise stems that far. Not a lot of franchises can say that. The Lakers can't say that. Yes, the Lakers and the Celtics are the top franchises in that regard as well, in terms of what they mean to the NBA, and then just what they mean to fans. And he was that for me. He was that for Celtics fans, in terms of what he did on the court with Bill Russell in those days, the golden era of Celtic basketball. Just
Mm-hmm.
moving on in his career, being coach, and then just doing, I think my favorite part, especially because I was alive to see it, was his play by play, and um, just the way he would call games. It was very like, how every team has their play by play announcers. So when you hear them, you're just like, oh, I'm watching Raptors basketball, or I'm watching Laker basketball.
Right.
Yeah, with him, it was like I'm watching Celtic basketball. Like, he completes it, and like you said too. Like, I think this year, um has been one, obviously, a lot of tragedy and a lot of adversities, but seeing a lot of big names, go, they just that are passing away. And it just goes to show times moving forward. A lot of people from the league are getting old, and we should cherish them before they're gone, like, because a lot of our, like, retired and coaches and stuff, they're up there in age, and then
Mm-hmm.
I think this year has taught us that we're taking it for granted too much. That's why when I bring up the coronavirus in terms of, the older coaches, I think about Greg Popovich and what he means to the NBA. If something happens to him, it's a trickle down effect that you were talking about, earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, what does this mean for the league? What does this mean for fans, in terms of something happening to him, and just stuff like that, like, That's why, yeah, it's an emotional year in that aspect. And like I said, as a huge
I agree.
Celtic fan, as a huge Celtic fan, that's why I was so captivated by the franchise and why I chose to be a Celtic fan. Um, instead of a Laker fan, especially living in
Mhm.
LA, because it was the culture for me. Los
Yeah,
Angeles has a amazing culture, undeniable,
it's
but for
different.
me,
It's
yeah,
different.
it's very, very different. That's why the Celtics are the reason. One day I want to visit Boston. One day I want to live in Boston. Blah blah blah. And it's not just the players, because here's the thing: players come and go, but
Hmm.
people like Tommy, like they were there forever until they're
Yeah,
passing. So
until the end for sure.
until the
Yeah,
end. So yeah.
and that's what you saw a lot of today. I think on Twitter, I follow a lot of Barstool guys, and a lot of Barstool guys like Portnoy, and a lot of
Mhm.
his like inner
Yep.
circle are from that area.
Uh-huh.
And they were all talking about like how they grew up, just like literally like what you said, how they grew up in elementary, middle, high school, college, just listening to him either on TV or on the radio. I mean that is you mentioned these every team has its own personality and culture based on the city they live in, but they also have their own personality and culture based on their TV and radio people. And I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. I could tell you, like when I listen to Laker games, like I'm looking for the same two guys, every time. And I reckon I'm like, oh, okay, like we're here. I prefer to listen to them most times over even the national guys, because the
Yeah.
national guys are you always get national games, but like I want to watch a Lakers game with those guys because these guys, they know the players the best. They are passionate. You don't do play-by-play and TV and radio for professional sports teams unless you actually care for that team and
Yeah.
want to put in the work. I mean,
Mhm.
they put in hours and hours of work. They're interviewing these guys. They're doing scouting. They're doing notes before the game. I mean, they're not just like showing up 20 minutes for the game and doing it. Like it's a full-time career. So they're very invested in that. And I think that's something you did see. Heintzen definitely had I think a brighter personality that came out a lot during play-by-play than even most other guys that do it. So I think that's probably something that Celtics fans are going to miss the most. So I agree. Good thoughts all around there. I think that's a good place to stop for this week. We covered a lot. Next week we'll go on Monday or Tuesday. We'll do some draft thoughts. We'll see if anything else has changed. Any other moves have been made. I do want to let everybody know we do have a draft show live next Wednesday. YouTube, it'll be all over social media. It's our group here. It's our head guy Joe. It's the Baseline podcast. It's like there's like 10 people doing this, so it's going to be crazy. It's going to be a lot of good information. It's basically like you get to watch the draft with us, see the picks as they happen live, see the immediate kind of discussions and recaps of like, was this a good pick? What are the good fits? We have a lot of things that are going to be going into this. This isn't just like hey, we're doing this in 20 minutes. Let's do it. Like there's a lot of prep work going in. So this is going to be a really big show. Plus, you don't have the egos as big as the guys on ESPN. So it'll be more fun. So definitely tune into that. We'll be posting links and promoting it throughout the week, so just stay tuned for that. Additionally, we do have the merch store, which usually I remind Roger about it, but this week I had to remind myself to do it. So you got the merch store there down below. Take a look at it. A lot of good stuff: hoodies, shirts. Real comfortable items to wear. So she's getting colder out. Got to get those hoodies. It's hoodie season officially. I got a couple of hoodies in rotation right now that just like they're there until everything thaws
The
in
Alex
March.
Caruso one.
Oh, I do have the Caruso one.
There
I
you go.
meant to wear it, but I get too warm when I wear hoodies indoors. So
Yep. There
we
you go.
got that. There he is. That's my guy.
Hmm.
So, but get your MBS merch as well. And I said we'll be back Monday or Tuesday of next week. Henry, thanks for doing this with me. Raj should be off load management next week. We'll give him a go in warm ups and see how he does. But thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.